Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today, and I'd like to thank the beautiful campus of USD for hosting this wonderful conference. So as Katherine just noted, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of History at California State University, San Marcos. Prior to coming here, I was a Luddite. I am, and I continue to be quite terrible with technology. So thanks to the NEH program, I had an opportunity to learn about digital history teaching tools and technologies, and I decided to experiment in one of my undergraduate U.S. history survey classes. Now, these classes are composed of students who typically are not interested in history, and they will be very explicit about this. They're taking this class to fulfill what's known as the American Institutions requirement. So you're going to get a broad range of students, typically freshmen, but they come from a variety of majors. So it's in this class that I decided to experiment with a digital history teaching tool, and the tool I chose was StoryMap.js. Okay. So the story I'm going to tell you today is not necessarily a success story. It's more of a learning experience. Okay? So there are many pros to using StoryMap.js, but there are also many cons, which I'll explain in a moment. Okay? So in this undergraduate U.S. history survey class, my students were required to use StoryMap.js to create a presentation that conveyed the California perspective on a particular historical event. Now, students had a wide range of topics to choose from, but most of our students chose the following 4 topics: women's suffrage, the Dust Bowl migration, the Japanese internment, or the Vietnam War. Now, this assignment had multiple pedagogical goals, and these included, first, that the students learn the technology, that they learn StoryMap.js. Second, our students had to attain experience with primary source or archival research and primary source analysis. Third, I wanted my students to learn, especially because they're not history majors, I wanted them to learn that historians are not engaged in this endeavor to tell the quote-unquote truth about the past. I wanted them to learn that their textbook is not the be-all and end-all of U.S. history. Okay? So I wanted to learn that you could take multiple perspectives on the past, and in this assignment, they focused on the California perspective. Okay. Now, because I had multiple pedagogical goals, both technological and non-technological, I scaffolded this assignment, or I broke it up into parts, and I had the help of a research assistant and a teaching assistant, Chelsea Snover, who is here today. She is an expert on digital history and digital technology, so she really taught me about this tool. Okay. So our first step was to explain to our students the difference between primary and secondary sources, and then we also helped our students to actually locate these primary sources, specifically 5 newspaper articles, 5 California newspaper articles using various digital or online newspaper archives. Second, we walked our students through an assignment, a primary source analysis, and in this assignment, the students had to think about, summarize and analyze those 5 newspaper articles that they found. Third, the students were asked to write an essay based on their primary source research, and in this essay, the students were asked to, again, compare and contrast the California perspective on a particular historical event with the so-called national perspective, which for the purposes of this assignment was represented by their textbook. Okay. And then finally, the students were broken up into groups and they created a story map. Okay. Now, there were many positives to this assignment. So first, students in their evaluations reported that they enjoyed learning different perspectives on the past. Okay. And then some students reported that they enjoyed learning the technology. They enjoyed learning StoryMap itself. And then finally, the projects themselves were very good, and hopefully this will open up for us. As Chelsea will explain to you in a moment, the background images, the background maps for all of these story maps have disappeared. It has something to do with the hosting of StoryMap. It's no longer being publicly hosted, right? And so that's why the background maps have disappeared. The students did a fantastic job of finding historic maps, right, that would have appeared here, okay? So what you'll be seeing now are the images that the students located and the text that they wrote together, right, for their story maps. And this was a particularly nice project on women's suffrage, okay? And another positive about this assignment is because I had the students working in groups, they reported that they enjoyed that experience, the collaboration, right, with their classmates, okay? Right. So this is an example of one project. Okay. Now, the negatives, the cons of StoryMap.js. So first, we discovered that students don't have access to Adobe Photoshop at home. So if they wanted to work on this project, they had to be on campus. So there's, in order to upload those historic maps, you needed to take those maps through a kind of processing step, and that processing step could only be done through Adobe, right? And we road tested this entire assignment and prior to the semester, but it wasn't until we were in the thick of the semester that we discovered that the students didn't have Adobe Photoshop. And this is a real problem. We want the digital humanities, right? The teaching of the digital history to be accessible, okay? Now, we also discovered through the evaluations that more students reported that they didn't like learning StoryMap. They felt overwhelmed by the technology, especially that processing step with Adobe. They were really thrown by that, okay? And then I lost 4 weeks of content. And that was difficult for me first because with this American institutions requirement, we have a lot to cover. And second, my own personal goal as a U.S. historian is to further develop my syllabus in the post-45 era, right? So that I can teach students later, the later portion of modern U.S. history. But by incorporating this digital technology, I'm very constrained, right, in that endeavor. So moving forward, I definitely plan to incorporate digital history, digital technology into my classrooms. But right now I'm thinking about ways, or I'm trying to figure out ways that I can do so without losing so much content. And maybe during the Q&A, some of you can offer me solutions or suggestions on the 2 fixes that I'm thinking about right now. The first would be to incorporate an easier to use and an accessible platform. So something like YouTube or even WordPress. And then I've also thought about scaffolding the teaching of history, scaffolding the teaching of digital history, okay? And this is what that would look like. I've been thinking that at the 100 level, right, in these introductory U.S. History Survey courses, what I would do is provide my students with the kind of historical and theoretical context to the digital humanities. And here the students would be reading a journal article or 2 about the digital humanities, and then they would finish an assignment, an essay assignment, in which they were required to compare and contrast a digital presentation of a historical event with a conventional paper presentation of a historical event. And then at the upper division level, at our 300 and 400 level, where I have more flexibility with respect to content, I would require my students to create a digital history presentation. And the difficulty level would increase by the time you got to our 400 level, where we're teaching our research and methods classes. Okay. So again, if you have any thoughts on this proposal, I'd very much like to hear them. And thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Chelsea Snover. I am a graduate student in the Department of History at Cal State San Marcos. My presentation for you today is also on StoryMap.js. I don't know if any of you are familiar with StoryMap that much. So what it does and what is broken right now is it takes an image for you and you put it through a process called Zoomify, where it takes an image and breaks it down into smaller squares. So in this program, you can zoom in and explore different areas. of a map. I've used it. I'm also a TA, so I've used it to explore political cartoons. So yeah, so here there should be a nice, lovely historic map of San Diego, but it's not there. This project was for a GIS course that I took to show, one, how to use StoryMap as a presentation platform, and then how to map, how to use GIS programs to map different areas of history and show different aspects of population growth, movement. So my project was on 3 metaphysical religions in San Diego: Theosophy, New Thought, and Christian Science, from 1901 to about 1924. And one of the first questions I always get when someone asks me, what do I do? I'm like, I look at New Thought and Theosophy. I don't know what you're talking about. You just get that blank look. So for this project, I took the opportunity to give a brief background on the 3 religious movements. That then also you can include links to different web pages, so readers could then go on and explore the history more in depth. For the GIS aspect, I took city and county directories from 1901, 1906, 1910, 1915, 1920, and 1924, and then located any listings for churches of these 3 groups, and then put it into an Excel spreadsheet, georeferenced it, and then mapped the points in San Diego. So these are all of these 3 metaphysical religions listed from about that 25-year period, which I then broke down by directory. So you can see in 1901, there's not that many churches. You have Loma Land here, which is where Point Loma Nazarene is today. It was a theosophical community. And then you have some other New Thought and Christian Science churches. Doesn't really change that much in 1906, but then grows in 1910. Stays about the same in 1915, and then grows again in 1920, and then shifts around. It's about the same number in 1924, but they move. Okay, that's not going to load. We'll go back. It should just be this same map here. So you can see the cluster of churches, some of the outliers, but mainly they all cluster in what's today the Little Italy, Cortez Hill, and the top of the downtown area of San Diego. And while I was exploring the 1920 directory, I also noticed that some people listed themselves as Christian Scientists in the directory. So then I mapped out their locations in reference to the churches, which are the blue dots. So the people are yellow and the churches are blue, which is interesting. Most of the people who listed themselves as Christian Science were women, which is these metaphysical religions mainly drew in women followers, so that kind of shows that correlation. But yeah, so that was just an example of how to use StoryMap to present history.
So I come to this conference from the strange positioning, not the strange positioning, but the slightly tangential world of the arts, which our colleague from the music came from earlier. And with this goal of integrating humanities and the arts through the digital. Because I teach media design, the digital is the natural conduit. The storytelling perhaps is not quite as evident. And in fact, there's been, I think, over the last half century, quite a distancing from overt storytelling in a lot of design. So while it's pretty well accepted that art is visualization, I do want to push this idea that my students can use visualization as a way to translate, as a way to get into text, and as a way to storytell in different ways. So I'm going to share with you a bunch of projects that students did in different contexts, and some of them are more straightforward. This first one is very much so a translation. I took the Campus Read project from last year in the spring, which was I Am Malala for the Cal State San Marcos community. And I asked my students in a digital imaging class to find a way to translate a section of that text. I have a series of those stories, but I will just show the first one. I think that's probably the most uplifting of the ones that my students did. And that is, I think, the most straightforward path towards translating a story. But I also wanted my students to make artworks using storytelling that maybe isn't as overtly communicative, ideally communicative. So this is a project where my students created their own data sets based on personal observations of their lives. So in this case, Matthew Leonard, he charts out during the day when he and his dog have physical contact, and he decided to make this self-portrait and the storytelling of what he holds important to him. So that kind of twist of how do you tell a story with data, but that also becomes visualized in a graphic sense, is perhaps obscure if we just looked at this without knowing that background. The color is a translation of digital images that he took of the night sky, or actually the daytime sky, at the time of the contact. So this kind of very abstracted portrait. This is another portrait. This is a lower division student in a general ed course who took the geographic coordinates of his location of places that he'd been and lived throughout his life to make his self-portrait. Another way of thinking of how do we translate ourselves to the digital. Another student who is actually a psychology major, she looked at her relationship to her friends and family, and she took key people in her life and mapped her mood depending on her relationship with them. So she had her chart that she took around with her for the week was really pretty intense, the data collecting that she did. And her boyfriend got some high marks over here. Her mom and dad, she did indicate that she was not going to share this with her parents because they would know. And this is this kind of different take on storytelling and design. Another student decided to tell the story of his life through his daily process of the pathways that occur during just the day. You know, if he does get ready for school and do everything on time, what happens? If he doesn't, the other possible pathways. This kind of circuitous way to have a narrative. This is another student who, in a translation project, tried to look at statistics of American prescribed drugs and wanted to make something physical. So this is obviously not digital, and yet it is a translation of something that she finds digital. So for me, as the instructor for these students, I encourage them to go back and forth, and that in the translation, maybe they get some kind of discovery and we get some kind of delight, potentially. This is Kadri Williams' piece, this is an interactive website, and mousing over these different flowers, I will show you on the next screen what happens. He wanted to talk about difficult social justice issues that turn people off when they're spoken about in overt ways. And so he decided to use something really beautifully designed, or at least graphically pleasing, to get people to start to explore. And then one realized as you go in that the 21-to-1 is a statistic, the ratio of young Black men killed, and mousing over these different flowers actually gives information about those individuals. This kind of goes back to that more personal narrative example. This is Sean Paget, who looked at, before he went to Cal State San Marcos, he was at Palomar College, and he had his transcript and decided, what if I took the data of my transcript and put this alongside the narrative of what was happening in my life? And he found that there was a direct correlation between his breakups, his health, and his grades, or what was happening at work. And lastly, I wanted to share a student's piece that shows a visualization of just musical peaks and valleys as she listened to a song that she was composing and really loved how the audio levels looked, the audio mountains. I think she called it sound mountains. The objective for each of these projects was to get students to start to think in one medium and then tell that story in another. Because of this work, this semester, I started teaching a new topics course that I proposed that's data visualization. So really, the work that's coming out of that is much more along the lines of how do you take a text and translate it into a three-dimensional object. And that's something that really came out of coming to these digital humanities seminars. So thank you.
All right, well, I am here to also talk about story maps. I'm a IT person, a GIS specialist, so I work in geographic information systems every day. And some days I'm working with the geographers or the economists or the political scientists or the physical plant guys, and then I get to have fun and come and work with folks in the humanities. And one of the things that I've found over the past few years is GIS technology is really going through a process of, I'd like to call it democratization, where the technology is no longer caught up in the supercomputers and the hidden hallways down in the computer center or the geography department, but now geographic information systems, GIS, practices are moving into all sorts of different departments. And one of the vehicles that we found are these wonderful story maps. And so I'm going to show you some of the work that I do with classes at Cal State San Marcos with story maps, which are this kind of combination of geography, but then multimedia and text content. And they really have become a great way for people to express lots of different sorts of ideas and information, and the learning curve we're finding is very, very short. It's pretty easy stuff to learn. So what I've done here is I've actually created a story map about story maps. So this is, I primarily work with ArcGIS software from Esri, a company up in Redlands. And this is a story map that's been created in the story map journal template that they have, where we have this large main stage area, they call it, that can contain maps or graphics or video or even a web page, and I have a web page here. And then we've got a text area off to the side, the sidebar, where we can have text information, and even if we want, we can embed links that change the content of the page. And so this is a little map that I created a while back. I walked around campus and took pictures of different pieces of public art. There's our mascot, the Tuquat, and Cesar Chavez is on guard at the Chavez steps. And this is a fully functional map. I can drag it around, I can zoom in and zoom out. In fact, there's a neat little trick that I can do. When I zoom in, I can actually make the Student Union building disappear. It's kind of a David Copperfield moment, but we'll bring it back. Come on. There we go. Now we have our Student Union building again. So the story map journal allows you to move section by section through your information. This is a little representation that I put together a while back, just to show that GIS is not just geography. It's all these different departments across our curriculum. And I'll show you a few examples. These are some general examples that I have found interesting over the past few months. I know we're getting tired of this, aren't we? Yeah. Well, but if you want to know where the candidates are, we've got a map, of course, of where the candidates are, and day by day, we track their every move. So you can see where Hillary's been, and then if you want to see where Donald Trump has been, boy, he's a busy guy traveling around the country. So this is a map that obviously is looking at political events. We've got some current events map, and for the life of me, I can't remember what my current events example is. Oh yeah, the African American History Museum. So this is another great story map that uses photos from the opening day of the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C. And so you can see the photos. These are crowdsourced photos that came off of people's Twitter accounts. And we've got markers on the map that show you where these particular photos were taken, and some caption covering those photos. An example from literature, and this is an example of a different story map template. This is a brand new one, the Story Map Cascade, and this is looking at the history of Guy Fawkes and Guy Fawkes Day in Great Britain. And you see that as I scroll down through here, there's a lot more really neat formatting of the text, along with the background photographs. And eventually, I think there's a map in here somewhere. It's a story map, and that's one of the things that we're finding is that this platform is actually evolving past the map in some respects. I have students that have been working on story maps where they've kind of forgotten that there's a map involved, and that's cool. It's great. What we're trying to do is get them to expand their minds and come up with new ways of presenting and sharing information. This got an art example from, I think this is from Pitzer College, and looking at all the public art that's available at Pitzer College. And so they've got a map of the campus over here on the right side of the screen, and we're having fun getting access to the photos. And then, okay, how many of you are children of the 80s? The MTV generation? Yeah, okay. I found this really cool story map about ska. And it looks at the history of ska in its beginnings in Jamaica, but when I was in college, I worked in a bar to put myself through school, and we always had MTV playing. And one of the favorite groups on MTV was, whoa!
Watch that! Watch this! This is the heavy monster sound! The nuttiest sound around! So if you're coming out the street
Come
and
on.
you're beginning to
Sound go down.
well, listen, Buster, you better start to move
Looks
your
like that
feet
didn't work.
to the rockin',
Yeah.
rock steady beat.
Is it perfect just like that?
One step
Yeah. So story maps don't have to be just maps and text and pictures. They can be video and music as well. Whatever type of multimedia information helps to tell your story. And I think we all are familiar with the madness of academia. And it's the weekend tomorrow, so we get to move one step beyond that. Sorry, really sorry. So the ArcGIS has they have this wonderful story map gallery where students and faculty who are learning about story maps can go and see a wide variety of different examples of what story maps are, and the different not only the different styles of story maps, but the different topics. I work with a lot of students on two particular types of story maps. The easiest one for them to learn is what's called the story map tour. And it's a design where you have a map on the screen, and I think this is, oh yeah, the assassination of Abraham Lincoln story map looking at John Wilkes Booth. So we've got a historic map that's embedded on the page, a series of photos in the tray down at the bottom, and you navigate your way through the story, through the map by just clicking on the individual photos. The map moves around, the content, the visual content changes, and the captions change as we go along. And I'll have a few examples from our students. I'm going to skip past the very fun City of Vista planning projects. And then we've got the story map journal, which is the template I've been showing you that has the main stage area where you can have maps or photos or videos. So here at Cal State San Marcos, I'm just going to give you some examples from a few classes I worked with recently. One of them is Professor Marion Geiger's Modern Languages class. Her students are looking at animated film around the world. And so what they did, I showed them how to use the story map tour. And so this is a story map tour of April in the Extraordinary. And the students that made this story map, what they focused on were clips from the film. And so they've put in stills that they captured from the animated film, added a caption, and then did a little bit of research on where exactly was this happening. And so they've got markers on that map. A little bit different approach was this group who incorporated, oh my gosh, yay. Rather than take film clips, they told the story of their animated film, but found photographs from the real world to tell the same story. And so they tell the story of the film in the caption area, and did a lot of research and found photos that would help to tell that story. And then I can't not show this one. So then we had a group of students that were working with an animated film of a fictional location. And so they couldn't possibly find those actual locations on the globe or on a map. But what they did instead is they talked about scenes and points from the plot line of the story and found other places in the world that they felt represented what was going on in the film at that particular time. Now, all of this content is hosted online. It's up in the cloud. The photos, you can either host them on the ArcGIS website, or you can put them in your own photo sharing site, Flickr, PhotoBucket, Google Drive, Facebook even. So we leverage different types of technologies. Now,
One more. We're just about out of time.
oh gosh. Okay. A French composition class where the students are taking on personas in a small village in the Alps. And they just started about a week ago telling stories, little vignettes of what's happening with their characters and turning it into a story map. So as the semester progresses, these students will be going to the bakery and going to a doctor's appointment and telling the story in French, since it's a French composition class, but then also showing you where their characters live. Can I have one more, please?
One more. Quickly.
Okay. All right. So then, Spanish Sociolinguistics class, where Professor Michelle Ramos-Policia sent her students out into the neighborhoods taking pictures of Spanish language signage. And so we have a map where the students have located markers on the map of where they're at, and then we've got pictures of the Spanish language that they're finding on signage in various locations. And so they bring that back to the class and have discussions about what type of Spanish is this that people are speaking on these signs, because it may not be the Spanish that they've grown up with or that they've learned in their classes. So let's see, close that off. And yeah, that's, please, I encourage you, give story maps a try. If talk to someone on your campus who does geography or GIS, and my guess is that all of your campuses have access to this resource, because the folks at Esri are trying to pass it out like the starter drugs to get us hooked into doing more and more of this work. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So we have time for one or two questions, if you'd like to ask our panelists something.
One.
Carrie, yeah.
Is that program difficult to learn from? Like, did you have to have a lot of knowledge to the tools?
To begin to use it, well, from the student side,
That's what I mean.
the first class that I showed with the animated shorts, I spent one class session, an hour and 15 minutes with them to get them up to speed, and then came back the next week for an open lab session. And that's the work that they did.
Okay.
So some of the templates are easier to learn than others. The story map tour is a really quick one to get into, but it really doesn't take a whole lot of technical background.
No more questions? Yeah, Jessica.
Is that program free or we have to pay to use it?
There are free accounts. To get access to lots more data and tools, you do need a paid account, but my guess is that your campus probably already has a license to the software. It's just unfortunate that the geographers don't have people like me everywhere going out and proselytizing.
I will add that the story map that Debbie used is it's StoryMap.js, and it is free. It's not nearly as robust as what Alan just showed you, and actually it's quite easy to use if you don't try to install your own map. But StoryMap.js comes with, you can go anywhere in the world. It's got its own basic map. And that's what I would recommend. It's created by Northwestern University. So that's just something to keep in mind as well. One more question? Yeah.
How does story map translate on a smartphone?
I don't think we know.
Esri is smart accessible. It's phone, yeah.
Good question. Anybody else?
Yeah, I've actually made some maps that are designed for use on smartphones, that
Okay,
point of interest kind of tour maps.
great,
And they can
excellent.
become interactive, so you can ask people to drop a photo into your map.
Anything else? Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot.